for members of the media actually having leaders who represent the voters and fulfill their mission to the public is secondary to the narrative. I remember reading in Game Changer I think is up here, which details the 2008 election, that President Obama had an advisor he's still on TV once in a while, David Axelrod, who spoke more about the need for Obama to have a compelling story and dramatic arc than to have actual coherent policies. That was David Axelrod's MO. I think he originates in Chicago. And it's pretty much the way a lot of people today think about politics. In fact, one of Obama's main media cheerleaders is Maureen Dowd, who has spent her entire career mostly writing crappy columns where she talks about how symbolically Barbara Bush was really an amazing first lady because she trashed Nancy Reagan, or all sorts of things about this is the way that a lot of the press reacts, because in their minds they're on the same social and they're on the same social level as these politicians, so they're not really there to inform the public. They're there in order to promote their perception of these politicians on the public level. Okay, so here you have an example of this from Slate, from Yasha Monk, who happens to be exactly this type of writer, and I've read other articles like this from him, and it's complete crap here. Because this is essentially what you're going to see is that people who are from the progressive or liberal, the so-called liberal labeled side of the political spectrum, they have this big talk about how it's important to preserve the institutions of democracy and of course maintain diversity and all that stuff, strong social institutions, whatever. And the reason that you have to you have to finally break through and realize that they don't believe in any of that crap is because the strongest example of those institutions is the idea that what the voters choose is really what determines what type of government it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that government is going to be the type that you're going to be comfortable with, or even one that's going to be successful. Because if the entire institution of democracy depends on a certain outcome that's known from the beginning, then it's a joke. It's not real democracy. And he goes into it, he says some elections only turn out to be historic with the benefit of hindsight. When Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party on March 11th, 1985, for example, the event did not seem particularly significant to most criminologists. Today we know that it was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. In other cases, contemporaries instantly grasped the significance of an electoral upset, though it was too early then and remains too early now to predict what exactly the election of Donald Trump might wreak. The victory of a proud outsider with such open disdain for the most basic rules and norms of liberal democracy clearly heralded the beginning of a new age. So what he's basically doing here is projection. It's classic, because he is saying that the person who doesn't understand liberal democracy, doesn't understand the basic rules and norms of the liberal democracy, isn't him who won't accept the mandate of the voter, but the person who won the election. Whether you like it or not, Donald Trump did win the election according to the rules that everybody had agreed upon. All this bullshit about the Electoral College and whatever, every president has known, every candidate has known going into the election that that's the way you win. And until they've lost, most Democrats have never really made a huge stink over it. Mostly it's been Al Gore and Hillary Clinton. although I think there have been a couple other cases in history. Jair Bolsonaro's election as president of Brazil falls squarely into the second category. So in this case, they have nothing to complain about because Bolsonaro, as I think he's going to mention, won by over 10 million votes. An extremist outsider until a year ago, Bolsonaro skyrocketed in popularity with a supercharged version of the populist playbook, railing against a corrupt elite. He attacked gay people, denigrated women, and praised the military dictatorship that ruled the country from the 1960s to the 1980s. On Sunday, he handily defeated Fernando Haddad, a gray standard bearer of the scandal-plagued Workers' Party in a runoff. So this is the only area, this is the only part where they really go into the fact that he doesn't even go into it. He just mentions offhand that the Workers' Party is racked by scandal. Until Bolsonaro's victory, it was possible, though perhaps not altogether plausible, to tell the story of Brazilian democracy as one of erratic progress. Since the overthrow of the country's last military dictatorship in 1985, there were about four changes of government through free and fair elections. The country's GDP grew from about $1,600 to over $10,000 per capita. The commitment to democracy gradually spread. Even the political turbulence of the past 2 decades could be given a positive spin. The election of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff, the left-wing Workers' Party's previous leaders, showed that Brazilian democracy was capable of integrating groups that had formerly been marginalized into its political institutions. Their subsequent indictments on corruption charges and Rousseff's removal from office threw the country into chaos and was perceived as illegitimate by many of the party's supporters. But it also did show that it was possible to hold the powerful to account for their misdeeds. As of yesterday, it has become impossible to cast the past half century of Brazilian politics in such a positive light. No, it's possible. I'll tell you how it's possible. You have to realize that in order for democracy to work, there has to be the possibility of more than one group triumphing, and for him to, or even beyond that, there has to be the possibility going into an election that people can cast their vote knowing that their candidate has at least the possibility of winning. So if he's going to say, well, in order for democracy to work, Bolsonaro can't win, then there's no point in having him as a candidate. There are countries where candidates get banned all the time. I think in the U.S. it does happen once in a while because of electoral rules. But I do know that, for example, in Russia, you can ban a candidate. It's not too difficult, and of course, in various countries around the world. We're not going to focus on that because in the end, we can't decide for other countries how they run their electoral system. You can certainly criticize them, but in this case, there's nothing to criticize because Bolsonaro didn't do anything in order to disqualify himself from the election beyond piss people off. As a result, the biggest democracy in Latin America is now in mortal danger. How does that sound familiar? Over the past few years, we have seen how much damage authoritarian populists can do to democracy, even in countries like the United States that are extremely prosperous and have a very long democratic tradition. Brazil can boast of neither of these advantages. Like many other countries in Latin America, it has never completely managed to shake its authoritarian legacy. And although the country has made significant economic progress in the past few decades, its GDP has not yet reached 6 digits, still significantly shy of the kind of wealth countries have historically needed to be saved from democratic backsliding. In short, a democracy with especially big structural challenges now faces an especially ruthless authoritarian challenger. The danger to Brazil's democratic institutions is very serious indeed. The fact is in itself so horrific that I feel a little reluctant to distract from its significance by drawing broader inferences from it. And yet the developments in Brazil do underline 4 important lessons that are of huge relevance beyond Latin America. If we fail to understand them, we risk underestimating the dangers that many countries outside of Brazil, including the United States, will continue to face for years to come. So I read this earlier. So the first point is the populist wave is accelerating. And this guy Yasha Monk, gets into, it gets down into, he becomes a Debbie Downer. He's like, well, even in elections where the populists don't necessarily win, like in Sweden, they gain a lot of seats, and in other countries they're actually kicking the ass of his preferred candidates, like in Hungary and Italy. Okay, which is true. It says no single leader can save us from the populists. Well, who is us? Who is us? Okay, and let's read this part. The sky, the saying goes, is darkest just before dawn. Since the world feels plenty dark right now, I fervently hope that this piece of motivational folk wisdom will turn out to be true. But I increasingly fear that the inverse is just as likely. In many democracies that have fallen prey to populists, the day has been brightest just before dusk. Take the case of Lula, born into dire poverty in the city of Caetés. He became a shining light of Latin America's left. Under his leadership, the Workers' Party fought for the poor, so here he's basically whitewashing Lula's tenure, okay, and pushed for an expanded welfare state without assaulting democratic institutions or vilifying the country's corporations. During his first years in office, Lula therefore looked as though he had helped to reconcile the country's least advantaged groups with the political system and to consolidate its democracy. But in the end, it was in good part Lula's failings that paved the way for Bolsonaro's victory. Because of economic mismanagement, the gains of the first years faded away the longer the Workers' Party stayed in office. Worse still, both Lula and his handpicked successor, Dilma Rousseff, were convicted on serious counts of corruption. The fact that such a figure of hope could turn out to be so fallible did much to make ordinary Brazilians profoundly cynical. The ascent of as blunt and angry an authoritarian as Bolsonaro probably would not have been possible without it. This is funny. Okay, first of all, in these paragraphs, he mentions that Lula and Rousseff were scandal plagued, but he doesn't go into what the scandals were because, again, like with David Axelrod, the details don't matter, just the story arc. And that's what you have to remember. They don't care. Listen, they will always talk about Richard Nixon and Watergate because all you have to do is mention Watergate without mentioning any of the details, and you think corruption, you think the breach of the public trust. However, with other scandals that are inconvenient for their side, when I criticize, for example, President Bush, I always talk about the invasion of Panama and the fucking Iran-Contra. Those were huge scandals of the Republicans that I think were completely wrong. Okay, so I think you have to, if you're talking about these politicians, you have to be as candorous as possible. Or candid. It wouldn't be candorous. But look what he says now. He says, unlike Lula's, Obama's presidency was remarkably free of scandal. The fact that he was ultimately unable to deliver on many of his promises had more to do with the obstinacy of his opponents than with any failings of his own. So again, here he's kissing the ass of the person he thinks is really the virtuous person. The Obama, by the way, and let's not minimize Lula's corruption. Obama may be far more corrupt than Lula. After all, he was basically the star fucker in chief. Had celebrities around literally all the time. Basically as if he needed somebody else's glow in order to make himself feel warm. Okay, so that isn't necessarily the scandal, but then you get into his issues with, of course, the Benghazi hearings and the issue of how he went about constructing the Wall Street bailout and all those book deals, and how about all of the stuff he did with raising money during the 2012 election from Wall Street. Those would be scandals for people on the left. People on the left before 2008 were complaining nonstop about the graft and corruption of U.S. politics and fundraising and everything. And Obama basically stabbed them in the back on all those notes. And then you have to go beyond that. Think of the IRS scandal, how they pursued political opponents in order to basically hound them from being able to focus on Obama during his presidency. Those were things that he did. And for the liberals don't just run away from it. They actually, either they pretend it didn't happen or they legitimately They legitimately never heard about it because they are in that echo chamber where those stories don't even penetrate. Okay, that is the David Axelrod model all the way. With David Axelrod, the details don't matter as long as the narrative fits. And with Obama, the narrative is very convenient to save because he hasn't suffered the legal downfall that Lula has yet. But with Lula as well, in those paragraphs, he didn't go into all of the disgusting corruption he did with the national oil company. Everybody wants to talk about how big oil is corrupt. I agree that big oil is corrupt, both private big oil and oil companies like Petrobras, which is Brazil's national oil company, which is pretty much the reason that Lula fell from power, Lula and Rousseff. Then he says, countries don't learn from their history. Brazil's military dictatorship, which ruled the country for 21 years, was exceptionally brutal. When Brazilians finally managed to overthrow the generals and build a seemingly robust democracy, it looked as though the country's intimate experience of dictatorship would protect it from authoritarian temptations for the foreseeable future. And then they go into some other, a lot of the same stuff. It says, they go into Germany, where the alternative for Germany is rising. They're going to call them Nazis, basically, even though they don't want to acknowledge that there's a difference between people who are anti-immigration parties like Alternative for Germany, which I don't believe is necessarily right-wing in terms of its economic policies. And then there in Brazil you have Bolsonaro. Okay, this is not an issue of people learning from their past. If he wants to talk about people learning from their past and the brutality of the government, he should probably take a look at some of the videos of the World Cup protests where Lula and Rousseff's police were basically walking through the streets, beating the shit out of people, and then bulldozing their neighborhoods in order to build stadiums for the World Cup and then for the Olympics. They don't care about that because, once again, details don't fit the story arc. And then it says authoritarian. So now they're backing away. This is the real reason why they're afraid of what happened in Brazil, and they're also afraid of things that are happening around the world. It says authoritarian demagogues can thrive in diverse countries. Demography, it turns out, is not destiny. Particularly in the United States, many people equate authoritarian populism with xenophobia and xenophobia with white people. A candidate like Trump, they believe, can only appeal to a dwindling white majority running scared because it is about to lose its privileges. A surprisingly hopeful conclusion follows from this frightening premise. Because the United States and many other countries around the world are growing more diverse, the potential for authoritarian populists keeps shrinking. If only we get through the next few years, the good side will win the demographic race and triumph over the populists. Bolsonaro's success shows that this is simply not the case. Though his views on race relations are hardly enlightened, his form of authoritarian populism is built not on overt racial appeals, but rather on sexism, homophobia, and a strident defense of traditional values. As a result, Bolsonaro has managed to win well over half of the vote in a country that is already majority-minority. As the same, I'm afraid, could easily be possible in the United States, even though Donald Trump is constantly stoking resentment against immigrants from Latin America. For example, a recent poll showed that more than 4 in 10 Latinos approve of his performance in office. If even a president who relies on such nakedly racial appeals is capable of winning a lot of support among minority voters, one can only imagine how much more appealing an authoritarian populist who actually tries to mobilize these groups might prove. So, first of all, they're trying to say that Trump doesn't want the support of Mexican Americans and other Latinos, which is plainly untrue, because he all the time says that any American of any ethnic group is welcome within his within his voter base and of course to contribute to the country. He said that so many times it's almost so. This guy, he's basically trying to force not only is he talking about his story arc as if nobody can interfere with it, whether it's about Obama or Lula, he wants to enforce his story arc on what's happening with Donald Trump, and that's plainly dishonest. You have to talk about politicians in the most sober way possible, without just drifting into your own preconceived notions. And is anybody perfect in that respect? Absolutely not. I obviously have very colored opinions about the Clintons and about Trump, and of course I have a very positive opinion of certain politicians like for example Shiva, and Rand Paul, and to a certain extent Donald Trump. But you still have to, for example, I always say that, say what you want about President Clinton, he helped very much to bring peace to Northern Ireland and Bosnia. That you have to grant him, and it's a major accomplishment for somebody. And it wasn't perfect the whole way, but people tend to forget about those two things. What President Clinton did in those two conflicts. Now, it doesn't excuse other things he did or other failures of policy that he had, but you can't just pretend somebody was a complete schmuck the entire time without evaluating their entire, the broader picture. In short, the rise of Bolsonaro shows that Brazilian democracy now faces an acute threat, that the populist wave continues to grow strong, that we should not trust democratic messiahs to deliver us from the many devils lurking in the shadows, that even countries which have in living memory experienced the horrors of authoritarian rule can entrust their fate into the hands of another strongman, and of course that in moments of perceived crisis, citizens are liable to throw the lessons of their own country's dark history to the wind. The threat posed by populism is neither short-lived nor cured by any magical tonic known to man. Democracies around the world, not just in Latin America, but also in Western Europe and North America, will have to grapple with the danger it poses for many decades to come. This is such bullshit. Let's see how the comments are, if there are comments. I don't know if there will be. But, yeah, here, this guy says exactly, populism equals democracy I don't like. And then this person writes this whole massive, which I can't go through right now, but a massive diatribe over how Monk doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, including the fact that Brazil is very Catholic. And there's also, and this person says, thank you for these insightful comments. I usually get more out of the comments than the articles. Let me see here. So then this person says that multiculturalism was actually embraced in Europe, not in Brazil, which, that's a good question. So a lot of people here are, and this is on Slate, are saying that this is bullshit. And I want to turn your attention here. This same behavior, this same attention, more to the arc and more to the importance of the story arc over the details, is really why our communications and media have sold out completely. They don't believe anymore that they're accountable to the people. This was the article in NJ.com, the newspaper for the shittiest state in the Union, New Jersey. And this is typical of New Jersey. It says, this is the editorial board endorsing Bob Menendez, a senator accused of sexual relations with underage prostitutes in the Dominican Republic, which were given to him as a favor by a donor, by a friend, the Dr. Solomon Mangan or something. I forgot his last name. And, they go into this whole thing where, before he was caught in 2015, Senator Robert Menendez broke Senate rules by routinely accepting expensive gifts, including private jets to luxury resorts abroad. He kept those gifts secret, breaking another rule. That he then used his office to promote the personal and business interests of the man who paid the bills. All that was the unanimous conclusion of the Senate Ethics Committee, including all its Democrats. It's a miracle Menendez escaped criminal conviction in an act of profound narcissism that he stayed in the race despite this baggage, putting a Democratic seat at risk while Donald Trump sits in the White House. The Republican challenger, Bob Eugen, is no better. He's using the closing weeks of the campaign to spread the most vicious lie of the election season in New Jersey, the suggestion that Menendez patronized child prostitutes in the Dominican Republic. Now, what they don't say is that that's not a suggestion. Those were allegations that were made by not the Washington Post, not Miami Herald, not this stupid Newark Star-Ledger. It was made by the FBI. The same FBI that these Democratic media people have been saying is supposed to investigate Donald Trump and uncover the Russian collusion. Well, they said that they have evidence that Senator Bob Menendez, patronized child prostitutes in the Dominican Republic. Okay? And then they go into this whole thing about Bob Eugen. And I'm not telling you to vote for Bob Eugen. In fact, there's apparently a libertarian candidate. And by the way, I don't give a shit what happens in Jersey because I don't even pretend to like the state. Okay? So people can say whatever they want. You want to vote for Bob Menendez, I guess why not live up to the Jersey reputation? And then they go into this. It says, unlike Eugen, Menendez is facing the epic challenge of climate change. He favors a cap-and-trade system or some alternative means to deeply curb emissions. Well, I hope he thought about that while he was flying back and forth on the jet to the Dominican Republic in order to bang child prostitutes. He has led efforts to clean up toxic sites and ensure that polluters pay. He has a 94% lifetime rating from the League of Conservation Voters. Even Republicans offer grudging respect for his political skills. He keeps his word when he gives it, says Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from North Carolina, and he can push back against a lot of political pressure, which is hard in my business. The secret of his campaign is that Eugen knows very little about public policy. Dig beyond the sound bites and he seems lost. Would he have voted for Obamacare? He's not sure. Would he have voted for the repeal of Obamacare? I'd have to know the specifics. Well, this is the same standard that the Democrats adopted when they passed Obamacare. They said you have to pass the bill before you can know what's in it. Would he have backed the 2013 immigration reform that Menendez helped write? He doesn't know. So yeah, there's plenty of flaws with Bob Eugen, but the fact is that they've decided to endorse a person who, as an elective senator from New Jersey, has basically betrayed the public's trust repeatedly. He's already been elected, and he's been fucking up the entire way and selling the state down the river. And that's why New Jersey is the dump that it is. And I'm not going to apologize for that because, honestly, they can vote for any asshole they want. They still represent the shittiest state in the union. And you can see there's a lot of New Jerseyites who are, they don't want to behave like a New Jerseyite. Almost everybody here is saying, choke it down. That's what she said. This article and recommendations of the Star-Ledger editorial board is totally irrational. Okay, let's agree with the crux of the article that neither candidate deserves our support, but to pick one of those two, especially Menendez, is insane. The clear choice is Murray Sabrin of the Libertarian Party, and not choke it down and vote for Menendez via the voting sheet. How can Menendez be possibly recommended with his unethical ethics and promotion of a convicted felon who had stolen millions and millions via Medicare fraud? Yeah, people forget about that. I'm sorry about this editorial, but the Star-Ledger isn't the chief offender. Phil Murphy, Cory Booker, and Steve Sweeney all have pledged support for Menendez, even when they could have opposed him or, failing that, stayed quiet. What happened to the Democratic Party that, reading the tea leaves, knocked Bob Torricelli off the ballot, extra legally maybe, in order to preserve the state's Democratic Senate seat? Here's another one. Where is all the Democratic outrage over sex scandals now? And then this person, who's clearly Jewish, because it's Am Yisrael Chai, which means long live Israel, says, vote for Eugen, the only choice in this election. Menendez is a crooked politician, and there's those allegations, and as we know, New Standard is guilty until proven innocent. True. Bob abandoned his good wife Jane to import Russian models while he claimed to be the target of a communist conspiracy. Funny how the News Corp all decided not to go to DR to investigate the FBI's allegations. And then some person makes the NPC thing, and you know, we can keep going. The bottom line is, for all of these people, these media whores, these fucking prostitutes, and yes, I'm not going to get many hits on YouTube right now because they screen your video for cursing and profanity or whatever. Meanwhile, you have a newspaper in New Jersey, which granted is still, you know, basically the dustpan of America, or that's not bad enough. New Jersey is basically the septic tank of Western civilization. Okay, that's the way I explain it. And I do have people that I know from New Jersey that are good people. And I'm assuming that that's some sort of mistake of fate that they were born there. And I'm happy that they left. But the reason that it is the way it is because you have people who claim to represent the opinions of New Jersey's media. And they're endorsing a person like Bob Menendez because they believe that the arc is more important, the story arc is more important than the details. Okay, I'm not saying they should, in this case, because yes, there are, I don't know much about Bob Eugen. He doesn't sound like a great candidate either. I would have also said they should endorse that libertarian candidate, whoever the fuck he is, who's not going to win anyway, but, you know, they don't care about their integrity. For them, it's about this ridiculous notion that they're saving liberal democracy, and that's not what's happening. Anyway, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. Also, please comment below and contribute to the Patreon in the link below, and I'll see you later.